The rain had been relentless all week, a gray needle threading through the gutters of Coronation Street until even the cobbles seemed to sag. It made the town smell like old paper and new sorrow, an apt perfume for Becky. She moved through it with a small, deliberate gait, the kind of step that tries to be unnoticed and, perversely, succeeds. In her bag, beneath bus timetables and a crisply folded receipt, lived a small, ridiculous thing, a plan. It had teeth and a name and a ghastly, imaginative life of its own. Becky had not always been a woman whose thoughts drifted like storm clouds to ruin. Once she had been vivid, gossiping at the Rovers, lending sugar to neighbors, apologizing when she thought to apologize. But the world had a way of rearranging the soft furniture of people. The last year had stacked misfortunes into a neat, suffocating tower. A crumpled business venture for her sister, a betrayal that tasted like words, and finally Costello. Costello had been an opportunist who wore charm like cologne. He had built a small empire of favors and borrowed loyalties, and he had used Becky's kindness as a stepping stone. He had smiled in ways that gutted her. He had stood in doorways and decided her worth as if measuring fabric against a rule. Becky told herself the injury was private ordinary, but ordinary can calcify into something dense enough to choke. The hospital had been a piece of happenstance. Becky did not expect to find Costello on a gurney with monitors whispering in the hush. She did not expect to discover how fragile he could look, how pale a man who had once been so theatrical might seem under fluorescent light. But once she did, once she watched the rhythm of a stranger's chest on a screen and felt her grievance translate into a tight, hot resolve, the plan became a thing she could not hold. It grew quietly, like mold in a cellar. There were lists, 1, 2, 3, scribbled then crossed out. Reasons were bottles on a shelf, each labeled with a different shade of hurt, humiliation, recompense, the memory of Jenna's business folding under Costello's indifferent signature. Becky flattered herself with the sort of precise language people use to justify the unjustifiable. If no one will stop him, maybe it will stop others. But she never wrote what you might read in a newspaper about ways to make things permanent. She was careful. If anything, she avoided details with the almost embarrassed daintiness of someone who wanted to keep the distinction between thought and deed intact. She imagined scenes, Carla in flames, Elaine's throat slit, only in the terrible privacy of her mind. On paper, she confined herself to sketches of logistics so vague they would be useless to anyone else. She told herself that thinking and doing were different, and sometimes thinking alone felt like enough. The hospital smelled of antiseptic and institutional grief. Becky had not planned this day. She had taken the bus to the town to breathe. She had looped past the hospital out of a nostalgic habit. People do that sometimes. Stay close to where they have been hurt to see if the hurt understands. Costello lay in bed 12, the curtain half drawn, oxygen tubing like fragile architecture. His eyes were open, almost surprised by the fact of him. She watched him nurse the tiny life that belonged to everyone and no one. For an hour, she sat in the visitor's seat and ran through every imagined satisfaction. She pictured Costello's lack of remorse made permanent, a perverse ledger balanced at last. She pictured, for a heartbeat too long, a headline, "Justice for Jenna." It was the kind of thought that made a person feel both nauseous and relieved, an awful, clean arithmetic. One harm, one counter-harm. Then, in the small interval between the third and fourth chime of the hallway clock, a nurse came in, young, name-tag bright as a coin. She spoke softly to Costello, her skirt rustling like a Judas. Becky could not hear the words, only the care in them. The nurse pressed a button, adjusted the drip. Costello's hand twitched. It was a small human movement, a twitch that translated to breath and delay. The nurse glanced at Becky, offering that involuntary smile you give the room when it looks to you to explain your presence. "You know him?" she asked. "No," Becky said, The answer paper-thin. A face. They made a ritual of it, checking charts, swabbing for fluids, calling doctors who were suspended somewhere between authority and fatigue. Every action, mundane and mechanical, felt now like a stave-preventing catastrophe. Becky sat in the chair and tried to imagine how, exactly, one harmed a life that cannot be regathered. She could not imagine the detail. What she could imagine successfully was the feeling, the thrill of dangerous agency, the quiet triumph that would follow. It made her feel monstrous and, for a moment, dangerously alive. News in Weatherfield travels on the small networks of friendship and coffee spoons.